Moving on from the triangle cases, one type of UFO that people report are small football-sized spheres, sometimes glowing, sometimes metallic, moving under intelligent control, suddenly changing their direction and speed. Here are just a few testimonies I have from the 18 cases currently in the database.
And then all of a sudden, this light came on, just a few feet below me. And to my surprise at the time, it was just a glowing sphere, a white luminous sphere.
So what sort of size are you talking about, Scott?
Well, I'm saying about this sort of big.
It was floating in midair above the water then?
It was floating, no, actually above the mud. The water
above the mud.
The tide was 100 yards away. But it was hovering.
Right.
And maybe a foot, no more than 18 inches off the mud. And I could quite clearly see from the glow of it, the luminosity, I could see the mud and the shingle underneath.
It was a solid ball. You could tell it was solid.
Right.
I described it as a football.
Perfect.
It was like a ball bearing flying through the sky.
Right, right.
It was perfect. There were no haze. I think it was just dead clear.
The ball came along horizontally, went up vertically, so it was making sudden changes in darting movements.
Yeah,
okay. And
there was equal as we were going along.
It just moved off in a relatively straight line, straight out across the mud and the shingle towards the river channel.
Looked up and it was there, bright silver, and it glinted in the light.
And it was an orb about 12, 15 inches across.
Just a little smaller than a beach ball.
And it just hung in the air and it was shining in the light.
I give the impression it was like a mild zigzag along that straight line, or a wobble, and this light went right into the beds.
Right.
And as a result of that, all the beds erupted off.
And all of a sudden it just went...
And we both saw it staying there, and then all of a sudden, straight away.
Right.
Just went straight up.
Now, Frank,
we tried to follow it, but we couldn't.
Right. One landed on the bonnet of my car and came within 2 or 3 feet and stayed for a few seconds to observe me, then flew off at an incredible speed, leaving a streak of light behind it. Have you got any thoughts? Have you thought about what it could have been, or what its origin might have been?
I know exactly what it was, a UFO. I've never seen anything like that.
I plotted the small sphere sightings on a map, and it does seem to reveal a predominance in the South Wales region of the UK. If anyone has an explanation as to why these things are seen in that particular area more than in others, please get in touch. This film would not be complete without a flying saucer case. The one I have chosen took place in broad daylight on a glorious day on the 26th of October 2000, not far from Aberdeen. I interviewed the witness by telephone. 10 a.m. in the morning, so it was daylight.
Yes, a beautiful morning, a lovely, bright morning.
Did your partner witness it as well?
Yes, Mary, she'd seen it as well. I shouted on her. I was actually standing at a patio door with a big patio in the lounge, and I was looking out the window, and I spotted this small dot in the horizon. Well, it was a large tree line. I noticed this object coming across this tree line. It was going quite slow, and there was no noise or sound at all in it. And I just watched it and watched it. As it came closer, I just sat and thought, I wonder what that is. Well, I was thinking it was a helicopter, but there was no noise, and the place was really quiet because it was a small village we lived in. And as it was coming across it, and it came closer and closer, I said, well, what the hell is that? So I shouted at my wife. So I shouted, Mary, so she came through and she says, what is that? And it was quite metallic looking. It was about 30 feet by 40 feet. It was very, very slow, and it was just drifting across the tree line that came down and moved closer to the house. And I said to myself, what is this? So we just both watched it, and it took about maybe 7 or 8 minutes just to go along the tree line. And as it was just past the house and it was about 150, 200 feet above which we was watching, it just turned and went on this other area. And just as it was turning, down came two jet fighters. My wife's never seen this, but I seen it. I went outside the patio to see what it was doing, and it went past the tree line, and because we lived on the River Dee, it went down the river and they just followed it, but there's no way that it was catching this. This was away, just away. And then about 5 minutes later than that, a big spotter plane came across, you know, with a big radar on top.
Mm-hmm.
And it was low, it circled all round for about 10-15 minutes. It was really fantastic to see, like. It was metallic, it looked metal, but it was dark, it was really dark, and it had like a hump in it. It looked as though it had a hump in the middle, but when it turned round you could see it was a saucer, there's no doubt about it. There was no noise with this, Richard, whatsoever. No noise whatsoever, apart from the jets came across. It was really quite eerie and quiet, you know. Actually, it was looking west, and it was coming from the west.
Mm-hmm.
And it just came out from the west and came past the house, and it went north, and it went down the river, which is good north into Aberdeen. And I've actually researched that date. Now, I know on the Holy Loch there was a Merlin helicopter went down in the Holy Loch. Now it came to that direction, which would be west of where we lived, quite a bit away, but these things are travelling at such a high speed. There's no way it could come. I mean, it could come to us. It was doing it at 600-700 mile an hour. It come to us in about probably an hour, you know, half an hour maybe. It was quite interesting when we researched this, because the two fighter jets that went after this UFO, there's a fighter jet went down in the borders that particular day as well, and the pilot had to eject. Now, what he had to eject for, I'm not saying it did anything, but it seems very strange.
So a helicopter went down in this place called Holy Loch, and a fighter jet?
And a fighter jet on the same day, yeah.
And do you know where the fighter jet went down?
Well, we think it was the borders, round about the borders.
Really? This sounds very similar to the Sheffield UFO case, military jets chasing a UFO and then crashing. In this case, a helicopter and a jet, which I am sure will have been covered up. They're not going to admit to endangering the lives of the public by chasing UFOs over populated areas. Anyone who has information on either a Merlin helicopter or a fighter jet crashing on the 26th of October 2000, please get in touch via the website. The cover-up of the UFO phenomenon is sophisticated and comprehensive. Most people are completely unaware that the cover-up extends to most printed media, TV and films. My research leaves me in no doubt there is a major cover-up on the issue, especially when the military are involved. Sheffield and Berwyn are two good examples of a cover-up following military involvement of a UFO. This is a letter handed to me at a conference. I have redacted the name in question. It states that one particular prominent UFO author in the UK in 1991 was paid £25,000 per year from a government agency to persuade this individual to change their stance on UFOs and give a rational explanation and belittle UFO stories. Anyone know a UFO author that did a 180-degree U-turn on their UFO stance? As I said, the cover-up also extends to television. In 2011, I exposed the Channel 5 Berwyn UFO documentary, where programme makers were ordered from a high-up source to remove all of Scott Felton's testimony from their show. Scott, who has done more research than anyone on the Berwyn case and found reliable witness testimony that the military were involved, was also removed from a scheduled BBC radio interview on the same subject.
I was assured that the people I named wouldn't even be in it. It was a case of, well, you know a bit about this case. Yeah. It'll be more or less your show sort of thing. The programme makers came along. They spent a week more or less in the Llanrheithlow area. They were interviewing other people who I did know about, witnesses and things like that. And I spent the best part of 2 days with them. I took them up onto the Berwyn Mountains. I showed them where the UFO was, or where I believed it was. I showed them all the evidence to show how I had come to arrive at those conclusions, where the UFO was. I didn't know anything till the day before the programme was going to be aired. The director of the film crew, I think it was Ian Leveson, not David Leveson, I think it was said earlier. Right. He rang me up and left a voicemail on my phone, and he said the good news is the programmes are being aired tomorrow. The bad news is you're not in it.
Right.
And then he went briefly on to explain that the commissioning editor of Channel 5 had pulled all the stuff.
If you want to know the truth about the Berwyn incident, it is in the Rich Planet 2011 film, The Berwyn UFO Cover-Up Exposed. So how come these craft are almost always silent? It is possible, of course, for objects to float in midair like a balloon using Archimedes' principle, which states that when a body is wholly or partially immersed in a fluid, it experiences an upthrust equal to the mass of the fluid displaced. In the case of a hot air or helium balloon, the fluid displaced is simply the air, which is a fluid, and the upward force keeping the object off the ground is equivalent to the weight of the air which the object is displacing. And balloons, of course, are silent. Do I really think these triangular craft are hot air balloons? No, I very much doubt it. The thin, flat shape of these objects, along with other characteristics such as huge acceleration and materialization, mean it is highly unlikely they are silent balloons. The most likely answer is they are using what is known as a field-based propulsion system. We are all familiar with terms such as gravitational or an electromagnetic field. Such fields do not make any noise, and if they are harnessed appropriately, can produce forces and hence movement or acceleration of an object. To illustrate how a field propulsion system might work, let's just consider this cannonball floating in the vacuum of space. It is far away from any stars and planets and is stationary. According to Isaac Newton, the cannonball would remain at a fixed position unless acted upon by a force. A space rocket, such as the ones used by NASA to power their space vehicles, creates a force on itself by ejecting mass out of one end at high speed. The rocket then experiences a force in the opposite direction to the mass being ejected and accelerates away in this direction. As long as mass is being ejected, the force is maintained and the rocket continues to accelerate until mass is no longer being ejected. So if the cannonball is going to move by itself in a particular direction, it needs to expel out from itself part of its mass. This method of propulsion has a major drawback. The vehicle has to carry within its payload large amounts of extra matter which it uses to eject out in order to move. So the vehicle is constantly becoming lighter, and of course, when it runs out of the extra matter, it can no longer change direction. A far more desirable method of propulsion would be to be able to make the object move without having to eject any mass. If we consider our cannonball and place a large planet next to it, the gravitational field produced by the planet would immediately cause the cannonball to start accelerating downward toward the surface of the planet. This is a field effect. In this case, a gravitational field effect. So the cannonball has moved without ejecting any of its mass. It moved due to the influence of a field. Once the cannonball is travelling at a high rate towards the planet, if we were to suddenly move the planet to the other side of the cannonball would start accelerating the other way and change direction. No matter how high the acceleration of the ball, any occupants inside the ball would not feel any force, because they are in free fall within a gravitational field. This would be a second major advantage of a field propulsion system. Let's say the object changed direction and appeared to an observer to move at an acceleration of 30 g, that's 30 times Earth gravity. The occupants would not experience any forces on their bodies at all. Is this what was observed during the Belgian UFO flap described by Professor Emil Schweitzer to the British MOD in 1991? Obviously, it's not possible to magically manifest a planet whenever you need one, but it may be possible to manifest fields around a craft that would have the same effect. In 1928, Thomas Townsend Brown received a patent for a device known as a gravitator, which achieved exactly that. Brown discovered the Byfield-Brown effect. When an object consisting of two electrodes of specific dimensions is charged to a very high voltage, a small force is generated which pushes the object in the direction of the field. The force is somehow being caused by the high voltage electric field. This force is sometimes called an electrogravitic force and has been discussed by several scientists, including Dr. Paul Laviolette in his book Secrets of Anti-Gravity. It is quite possible this effect was used as the key principle in developing propulsion systems for top-secret aircraft and spacecraft from the 1950s onwards, and could be what is propelling the silent triangles seen over the UK by witnesses.
Aircraft companies have been getting billions of dollars from the military to develop this stuff in secret, but they sign secrecy agreements, and the military won't let them out of it. An example, and this came through a reliable source, was in the Department of Energy. He heard that Boeing wanted to declassify some of the important electrogravitics work it was doing for commercial use, and it was denied. This has been going on for decades. They've been working on this in private, sort of like Manhattan Project classification. So you're going to have all sorts of craft having been developed. I firmly believe these aren't used just around the Earth. I mean, there's actually regular flights throughout the solar system. Obviously, their next goal would be interstellar travel. I believe that projects like that are already in progress.
Another scientist, the Russian Yuzhin Podkletnov, is also alleged to have used high voltage and a superconducting disk to create a force which could potentially be used to silently propel a craft.
Discharges these 2 million volt pulses, the tests that he was making, through a superconducting disk, and the discharge, even though it ends up smashing against the other electrode, it keeps going, in effect, as a gravity wave out the end. It's sort of like a gravity cannon. It produces a beam of gravity shock waves that is confined. It's pretty much non-divergent. For example, they were able to knock books over at 2 kilometers and even detected its effect at 200 kilometers. So basically, with something like this, you could put a beam between here and the nearest star system and use it to propel a craft. Or you could put it on the craft and be propelling the craft with this, creating its own beam on board.
As I mentioned earlier, the B-2 bomber, once airborne, is alleged to have a second mode of travel, where the leading edge of the wings are electrically charged positive and the exhaust gases charged negative. This reduces drag on the aircraft and also reduces the radar signature, both highly desirable in a stealth aircraft. But Dr. Laviolette contends this charge is also contributing to the craft's propulsion, and even that the jet engines can be switched off and the craft fly purely using an electrogravitic mode which would be totally silent. It is highly likely there are a plethora of top-secret aircraft which have been kept totally secret out of the public eye, using field propulsion. I personally don't think we can say any UFO is a non-human craft just because it has advanced characteristics. That doesn't mean I am saying that all the craft are man-made, but what I can say with absolute certainty is some group or groups are flying craft which are way beyond the capabilities of any publicly known aircraft. They are doing it right under our noses, and they are doing it without public permission. Are you happy about this? As I've said throughout the film, we need to find out where these things are going, then expose it to the world. If there are undisclosed secret bases being used to house these craft, I have some good ideas as to how they might be discovered. Anyone else who has further ideas, please get in touch via the website.